I'm sure you've encountered some people loosely calling you as someone with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD. This is when you can't pay attention or jump from one topic to another. That's because some people use ADHD loosely to mean can't pay attention or can't concentrate. Others scoff at it as a way of prescribing medication to kids who just eat too much sugar. It's a clinical condition, which means the real thing makes life a lot more difficult than it should be. But it can also be difficult to distinguish between ADHD and behavior of normal children. Today, we'll talk about how to recognize the signs and symptoms of ADHD and get the help you need for your child to lead a full, productive life. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this is MedTalk Health Talk, your partner in healthcare. Life with a child with ADHD can be difficult and overwhelming. But as a parent, there's a lot you can do to help control the symptoms, overcome daily challenges, and bring a greater sense of calm in the family. So having a clear understanding of ADHD can be beneficial for everyone. Joining us today are Dr. Mark Rachel Cruz. He's a behavioral and developmental pediatrician from Capital Medical Center. Also with us is Dr. Constantine Yu Chua, a psychiatrist at the Philippine General Hospital. Thank you both for joining us. Now, most of us usually think that ADHD is about a child who's out of control or simply in constant motion. But the reality is it's much more complex than that. Some children are hyperactive, while some just sit quietly with their attention elsewhere. And some put too much focus on one task and have trouble shifting to another. Now, Dr. Cons, how can you tell the difference between ADHD and normal child behavior? How do you tell one from the other?
Children with ADHD are not all that different from those without. Of course, they share the same interests, joys, and dreams as other children. The main difference is that in children with ADHD, they have hyperactivity. So this becomes a pattern in their home life, in their school life, in their social life. And this usually extends to difficulties with what we call executive functions, which are the brain's control functions. So this may include difficulties in pacing oneself, regulating one's emotions, planning, organizing, and keeping things mentally in check. And all of these can make life at home, in school, with their friends more difficult. But this does not mean that they're intellectually lacking, weird, lazy, or bad.
So there's really a lot of complex things happening to a child with ADHD. At sabi nga nila, it takes a village to raise a child. As it is, there's a lot involved in taking care and trying to raise your children, lalo na if there's a condition involved. Now, the signs and symptoms of ADHD depend on which type of the condition the child has. It can be the inattentive type, the hyperactive impulsive type, or a combination of the two. Now, symptoms can change over time, so the type of ADHD may have to change too. Let's first go to the inattentive type. It's not that they can't pay attention, but when the task is repetitive and they find it boring, they quickly tune out. Now, Dr. Mark, can you expound on this, please?
That's right, Dr. Freddy. Some parents might think that their child does not have ADHD, even if they do, just because they can focus on their video games or a TV show all day. No, so we have to point out that it is, as you said, if for activities where they require focus, but they are not interested in it or bored with it, then they lack focus. No? And this is usually related to their academics. No? And usually this type, it used to be called loosely as ADD, no? But the official term is the predominantly inattentive presentation is seen in females, and often they are caught at a much later age just because they are quiet in class and not disruptive, unlike the most common presentation, which is the combined presentation, where they can be very magulo, so to speak, and disruptive in class, and they get the teacher's attention early on in their school years.
Mm-hmm. And pag-uusapan natin yung difference nun later on in the show. But one of the most obvious signs of ADHD is hyperactivity. And while many kids are naturally active, kids with hyperactive symptoms are always moving. Dr. Mark, could you describe this one further?
Yes, in the vernacular, parang nakaupo daw sa kalan. No? They are very fidgety. They're just seated, but they fall off their seats. No? They're seated, but you can see them moving something, touching something. Now the teacher will notice them playing with the fidgeting with the audio and the video and moving in and out of the screen. And it can be disturbing, actually, or distracting for the teacher and the other classmates as well. No?
Now, another symptom of ADHD is being impulsive, meaning these children have problems with self-control. They censor themselves less, interrupt conversations, and pretty much invade other people's space. Now, Dr. Cons, again, please tell us more about this particular type of behavior.
When we say impulsive, it's like having a difficulty controlling yourself or not thinking first before doing something. So in children, we can see this. For example, they can't wait their turn. They answer before the question is finished. They blurt out the answers in class. They don't raise their hands. They can't wait in line. They can sometimes grab objects before asking for it. So those are some signs of being impulsive in children.
Now, really, it's recognizing these behaviors and watching out for patterns. So, there's ADD or ADHD. So let's explain how is one different from the other, because many people use these two terms interchangeably. Dr. Cons, are they the same?
ADD or attention deficit disorder is an old term used to label what Dr. Ratio Cruz has said, the predominantly inattentive type of ADHD. But now it's all under the diagnostic term ADHD because it's actually very rare that there are persons who are just purely inattentive. Usually they would have little bits of all three: inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. So they're now all under what we call ADHD.
Okay, at least maliwanag na yun ngayon. Now, the exact cause of ADHD isn't fully understood, but a combination of factors can play a role in the development of this condition. More on this when we come back. You're watching MedTalk Health Talk right here on CNN Philippines. Factors that may be involved in the development of ADHD include genetics, the child's environment, or problems with the central nervous system at key moments of development. We're together in health. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez. Is ADHD hereditary? Alamin nga natin yan. Dr. Cons, what are your thoughts on this?
You're right. ADHD is partly hereditary and correct. It is a brain condition. Let me make it clear. It's not an attitude problem. But what would cause it would be, of course, there's no singular factor, but anything that affects the brain can contribute to it. You mentioned it: genetics, maternal health, effects of substances on the fetus, environmental toxins, brain injuries, etc. Now, let me tell you what does not cause it. It's not caused by vaccines, not caused by sugar intake or food allergies. Now, you also mentioned about psychosocial factors, which, yes, it can lessen or worsen a child's biological predisposition to ADHD. So kung meron ng ADHD, pwedeng lumala or mabawasan, depende pwedeng sa parenting, if the child is assisted in developing, if he or she is just left to play with gadget, given a good example by the parents, subject to chaotic or peaceful environments, all of those will contribute to whether or not ADHD will progress.
Now, Dr. Cons, as a follow-up question to that, apart from genetics, what other factors may lead to ADHD?
Anything basically that affects the brain. So, of course, that can be biological, that can be substances while the baby is developing, environmental toxins, various brain conditions like seizures, brain injuries, and of course, the developing brain is subject to what happens to us in our life, whether we grow up in a structured, in a peaceful environment, the parenting that the child receives, the experiences of a child, whether they're learning experiences or just left alone to play with gadgets, all of those shape the developing brain and eventually whether or not the symptoms of ADHD will be prominent.
Dr. Mark, who else are at risk of developing ADHD, and how important is it to understand why a child has ADHD?
Yes, Dr. Chua mentioned several factors. No, prematurity. A child who is born premature, very low birth weight, they are at risk for having ADHD. If the Dr. Chua mentioned the prenatal factors, if the mother was taking drugs, alcohol, smoking, we have to watch out for the child possibly ending up with ADHD as examples. No, and it is very important that we diagnose them if they have the diagnosis, just because we have seen that with the early diagnosis, early treatment or management, the outcomes are much better, no? And we avoid the possible comorbid conditions such as depression, anxiety, ODD, bipolar disorder, tics disorder, learning disabilities. We can kind of lessen the chances of them developing those if we manage them early on in an appropriate way.
So if you're worried about your child having ADHD, it may help to speak to their teachers first to find out if they have concerns about your child's behavior. And there's no simple test to determine whether you or your child has ADHD, but your specialist can make an accurate diagnosis after a detailed assessment. Dr. Mark, what happens during the assessment?
Yes, when we do an assessment, we make use of many documents. We ask the parents to bring in a teacher's report. We talk to them about their own rehabilitatory history, and we still do the extensive physical exam and neurologic exam because there are conditions that might look like ADHD, and causing the symptoms, but the child actually does not have. So we look at the report cards. The very challenging now because as the joke is, it's the parents and grandparents who are should be getting the awards for high grades, but we make use of those as well. We look at log notes of the teachers to the parents as well. And we gather all that information in coming up with an assessment or a diagnosis possibly.
Diagnosing ADHD depends on a very strict criteria. And to be diagnosed, your child must have 6 or more symptoms of inattentiveness or 6 or more symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsiveness. Dr. Mark, are there other things to consider when diagnosing a child that may have ADHD?
The 6 out of 9 symptoms that you mentioned, Dr. Freddy, they should be present for at least 6 months in more than 2 settings, or at least 2 or more settings, and they should affect the child's functioning. Because as you mentioned, if we see all of these symptoms in a preschooler, that could just be a typical behavior of a maliput na 2-year-old male child. So we also consider those. And again, there are conditions that we have to look out for, diabetes, hyperthyroidism, many conditions that we look into just to make sure that we are not missing something that might be causing the ADHD-like symptoms.
When it comes to ADHD, the best mantra for families is, we are in this together. It's really about everyone in the family understanding the condition so they respond to the family member accordingly. Knowing why a child behaves the way he or she does will help you respond and engage with a child that will prove helpful to everyone. ADHD can be managed with the right treatment. You can find what works best for your child and the family. But do you know that ADHD can carry into adulthood if left untreated? We'll talk about this when we come back. Half of the children with ADHD can carry this condition into adulthood. Untreated ADHD can cause physical and mental problems that can put a strain on relationships and cause difficulties in everyday life. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez. MedTalk Health Talk is your connection to healthcare. Adult ADHD is a mental health disorder that includes a combination of persistent problems such as having a hard time paying attention, hyperactivity, and impulsive behavior. And this can lead to unstable relationships, poor work or school performance, low self-esteem, and other problems. Dr. Chua, what are the symptoms of adult ADHD?
You're right, Dr. Freddy. Around half of the children continue to have it. So it's a myth that ADHD only applies to children. Surely adults can still have it. Mostly it's the inattention that persists. Common symptoms include having consistent difficulty managing home and work responsibilities, or what they call adulting. So they can't seem to get things organized. They frequently procrastinate or have a hard time starting, continuing, or finishing tasks. Sometimes forget their obligations or come in to work late. And people will sometimes describe them as parang magulo or absent-minded, while adults with ADHD would frequently describe their experience as, I'm always overwhelmed and I always break down. Adults who have ADHD would actually come in with mental health problems, depression, anxiety, temper problems, only to find that ADHD is at the bottom of it.
That's right. So it's very important to have a consultation with a professional. Now, adult ADHD is relatively common, but often unrecognized. And to this end, the World Health Organization has prepared a self-screening questionnaire to determine whether you might have adult ADHD. There's no cure for ADHD, but there are several options to help manage this condition. And treatments range from behavioral intervention to prescription medication. Now, Dr. Mark, what are some of the therapeutic ADHD treatments?
The evidence-based management of ADHD is still medication. Despite its bad rap, there is very good evidence the symptoms of ADHD in the individual. But we just don't rely on that alone. Another evidence-based way of managing is behavioral therapy. Educate the parents and educate the teachers as well on good strategies of managing a child with ADHD. So it's really more of a combination of different ways of managing.
The demands of monitoring a child with ADHD can be exhausting, and your child's inability to listen almost always leads to frustration. Dr. Mark, can you give parenting do's and don'ts for those with ADHD?
Yes, for the parents of kids with ADHD, your child is not lazy, it's not bobo, as some might say, but we have to help them build their resiliency. And how do we do that? We empathize with them. No, we focus on strengths rather than weaknesses. All of this will help to support them and encourage them. And because we know that children or individuals with ADHD have very positive things about them as well, that they can be successful later on.
Now, ADHD medication can help improve symptoms, but they can also cause some side effects. If you're not comfortable with ADHD medications, there are also some natural options. Dr. Mark, are there some natural remedies that people can give their child with ADHD?
Well, going back to the medication, which is a very good evidence of efficacy, we can work with them on these side effects because, as you know, above all, we want to not do any harm. The benefits have to outweigh the risk. And sometimes, Dr. Freddy, these side effects are actually beneficial because one of the main side effects of a stimulant medication is decreased appetite. So if the child is, for example, overweight, that might not necessarily be a bad thing, And for side effects like headaches or tummy aches, some of these are mild. They often go away on their own. So we manage it as well.
We'd like to thank our guests, developmental pediatrician Dr. Mark Horacio Cruz and general and child psychiatrist Dr. Constantine U. Chua. Most children diagnosed with ADHD no longer have symptoms by the time they reach their 20s. And for some, ADHD is a lifelong condition. But for most, it can be managed with therapy or medication. And what's important is to take the time to work with your doctor to determine what's best. It helps not only your child, but the rest of the family. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, helping build a healthier future for you. Thank you for watching.